my role was to comply and say yes. And it's scary now to look at the situations that I was in, but I think even more so some of my peers were in. And we didn't know that we were being manipulated. We were just trying to be cool like the adults in the room. But I have all of these stories. Like, I constantly think about...
Alyson, welcome to Real Pod. I'm so happy to have you, and it's so great to meet you.
It's nice to meet you as well. I was listening to your show this morning.
I'm so honored, so touched. I was listening to yours as well, Dear Hollywood. It's remarkable. It's
Thank you.
Truly, I mean, from the storytelling to the examples you're giving, and then the analysis and the assessment of child stardom and all these things that I've never really thought about before. But the biggest truth is that everyone has really idolized this idea of being famous. I think if I asked any of my friends when we were young, we all wanted to be famous.
Sure.
I'm watching Cheaper by the Dozen thinking, I wish I could be in that movie. I wish I could do that. Who didn't wish they could do the thing on Disney?
I wished until I got to do it.
Did you do that? That's so sick.
And even then I was on set going, is this going to be as good as Hilary Duff's? Is this going to be as cool as Raven Simone's?
Wait, honestly, we need to take a side part. What is that like? What are you like? Are you holding a green screen wand?
Here's the trick of it all. It is a green screen wand. However, when we're watching at home, we've all been practicing backwards because once you're on camera, you have to flip it in reverse. So I thought I had the geometry down pat until they said, by the way, you have to actually demonstrate it the other way. And I thought, no, there goes my perfectionistic attempt.
Oh wow, that's so true. I need to. Did you get to choose your color?
No. We didn't see anything. I don't even remember what the backdrop was. I think mine ended up just being against a white backdrop. Yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool. But to everything that you stand for, there's so much happening behind the scenes that we're not seeing when it comes to child stars.
Right. And I appreciate you noting the other layers of the Dear Hollywood podcast that I'm producing and releasing right now, because I think a lot of times when people hear the topic and they might be familiar with someone from previous work, the assumption is, oh, this is just going to be about them either sharing the sensational, dramatic horror stories, or it's going to be very self-centered. And the mission with this podcast is so much larger. I do infuse each episode with personal anecdotes, but the main focus is, one, I need to help you understand the fuller picture of what's going on in terms of child labor in entertainment. Two, we also have very real and concrete things we can do to improve what's happening in the industry. And three, there's an opportunity here for us all to reflect on what was happening in our own childhoods, the dynamics we had within our family, within school, within whatever systems, you participated in. And so it's a much more kind of holistic and comprehensive analysis of childhood development and mental health. And, it doesn't take much to look at the statistics around, young child performers or high-performing children in academics or athletes. You do see these really big peaks in mental distress or mental illness. And I'm not here to compare and contrast suffering among young people at all. That's really not the intention. It's, this is really interesting. What are the causes and effects here, simply put? And then what can we do about them?
And it's your personal experience. So you're going to care and have passion for that. And, I do a lot of work when it comes to student athlete mental health. Does everyone have mental health? Yes. Are there so many important groups and causes? Yes. But that's the experience I had. And so I have this really unique tie to meeting student athletes.
Right. And you can speak to the nuances of what they're experiencing before and post, event or meet or whatever, sport of choice. And similarly, my team and I were building artist well-being toolkits. It's not because artists are the only ones who need well-being toolkits, but not everyone outside of the arts needs to listen to a 5-minute guided meditation on how to enroll into character and how to get out of character after you've just portrayed a really traumatic scene. So it's, coupling your lived experience, and then if you've self-educated or you've gotten any kind of certifications, or you just know you can, promote these certain tools for self-empowerment, then couple your lived experience with your areas of expertise, find the community and serve. And so, yeah, that's what I'm doing. But I recognize that the concept of fame is more universal. It is this broader thing that kind of plays on our hearts and psyches in such interesting ways. But it's when you remove the romantic view of fame, it really makes so much sense why we would be drawn to it. It promises to fill some of our deepest biological needs around, okay, if you're famous, then hopefully you're also rich, which is not true. But, then, okay, so we've got access to resources, and now I don't have to worry about, shelter and food and whatever. Then you've got some kind of status and visibility, which we conflate with a sense of belonging and relatedness.
Everybody loves me.
Which is not true either. But that's the illusion. And then, third, there might be this sense of contribution to the world, like you have more significance and it's validated by all of this, external applause or whatever. Again, that's also not necessarily true. So it makes sense why we would be drawn to it. And there's a whole industry that actually would say go for it and reinforce it until the day we die. For those of us who are like, wait a second, I think this might be an illusion, and we start digging deeper, thankfully we have the chance to deconstruct, free ourselves from, feeling attached to the industry as that solution, and then hopefully we can heal and feel more whole and live a more conscious life.
Not to take it to the existential crisis real quick,
please.
But as you say that, it makes me think of like even the Olympians I've spoken to. It's that same pursuit. Someone in the working world who wants to make all this money and become the CEO. But what we're all not waking up to is the fact that we, like, deep within us, like, can tap into this deep sense of being and enoughness that like already exists. And I've been learning about this. And are you familiar with Eckhart Tolle?
Yeah.
Okay. I love his book, A New Earth. And I have a spin-off podcast with my best friend, So Much to Say, where we're reading it. But he's just talking about how your ego is trying to get all these things, right, in this external validation. But really, you have the ability now to tap into this sense of like wholeness, oneness, divineness.
Right.
And we'll spend our whole lives ignoring it. He gives this analogy of it's like a person who doesn't realize they have 10 million in the bank.
Yes. And it's wild because when I think about each of us almost as a puzzle piece, and if I'm going in and I'm not aware that I'm already the full puzzle and I see myself as just a piece, then whenever I'm trying to connect with someone, even let's say just say a romantic relationship, it's coming from that place of lack and incompletion and incompleteness. I don't know what the proper word is.
Yeah.
And saying, okay, let's try to create one whole together. And by no means am I saying like, we're all humans in progress. So of course I'm going to have areas of strength, areas of deficiency, XYZ. But if I take some time to identify all the parts within myself, including the ones that scare me, the ones I'd rather reject and deny, the ones that look real messy, but I integrate all of those parts of myself into a sense of wholeness, now we're talking a real sense of liberation from like, only ever reaching out to someone from that place of lack and need. Now I'm showing up to you as a more whole version of myself, and we together, people talk about like it's one whole person and one whole person creating a third thing, and not like two incomplete people, trying to become whole. I say all of that knowing like it's a process. So growing up, of course, I leaned on people to figure out who I am and who am I. If you want to get existential, like who are we really, except for this amalgamation of all these different influences we've had, our genetics that we didn't choose, the ideas that we were fed, the society we're in, Like, yes, Alyson, I can say there's a selfhood of some sort there, but really, I'm just an entity comprised of all these other little pieces.
I think about that even with my name. I got married, and so I took my husband's name because I wanted to, but I feel like if someone says Victoria Garrick, which is my maiden name, I'm like, that doesn't feel like me. But if they say Victoria Brown, I'm like, that doesn't feel like me. But Victoria Garrick Brown feels like me. But then I tell myself, this is dumb. It's words. I'm like, my name could have been Sarah. Like, doesn't mean, like, it doesn't make me like who I follow what you're saying. And my best friend and I will joke, we're just like, I am
period.
Right.
Like,
or like open blank space.
Yes. Love that even more. Yeah. There is, I don't know if you've ever tried different kinds of meditation, but many years ago, I was sort of trying to deconstruct facets of a previous faith congregation and thinking, there are principles here that seem true, and yet the human construct, the man-made power system that's happening around, doesn't seem like it's a reflection of that. What do I do about it? And a mentor in that time frame shared this meditation. I'm sure there's like a fancier way of describing it, but I call it the I am that meditation. And essentially you just spend, let's say 5 or 10 minutes, and you look around or sense into whatever senses are available to you, and anything that you encounter, you take a moment to identify with it and say, I am that. Like, I am this microphone. I am the person helping produce this podcast. I am whatever I'm seeing, the sun. And it's a chance to recognize the interconnectedness of everything. It's a chance also to create some distance between the story that drives us every day of like, I am Alyson and Alyson only does this. And to really just kind of, like you said, experience the open space of being and not the hard line. And then I say all of that, and then I'm like, let me contradict myself and say there's also important value in doing meditations around boundaries and knowing like, where do I start and where do I end? But all of this is like under this umbrella of self-exploration, and I've found that leads to a sense of empowerment and resilience, and it feels so essential.
I love that, and I follow it. I do. This idea that there is this beautiful sense of the world does work in one way, and this small thing you do today can impact someone who then does this big thing later, and it's a domino effect. The other thing I'm thinking too is to do this self-exploration, to do this work, most of the time it is born out of like a pressurized situation where someone hits their like dark night of the soul, where you then are led to ask these bigger questions. Now, I'm sure when you were getting these really exciting roles and these parts when you were growing up, and Cheaper by the Dozen, which I love, and then Camp Rock, and being on Sweet Life of Zach and Cody, and all of this, you're not thinking one day I'm gonna be sitting on this yellow couch doing this like expose on what felt like kind of the darkness in some of that. So when for you, like, can you talk about some of the success and like when times were really good, and then when did you start to notice that you were taking a turn?
Sure. Well, I love the question, and I do want to clarify that just like with all of us, if you were in a more traditional school setting, sometimes your friends had no idea what was happening at home, and so they only saw you smiling in class. And for me, I do want to, lay out what was happening in my own home while these wonderful projects were taking place. So I am the child of divorce. I am the child of an addict. I am the child of abuse. And if I only talk about what was happening on set, we're missing these other critical childhood experiences that like probably more deeply inform my personality traits and coping strategies and what have you. So when I was on set, I think what I didn't realize is, your nervous system is in sort of a hypervigilant peak state when you're experiencing fame. Everywhere you walk outside, you have to be aware that someone might come up to you, touch you, grab you. Yes, it could be a friendly request for a photo. It also could be a stalker. Someone, when you're on stage and you've got thousands of people chanting your name, well, now you've got this other kind of adrenaline spike, and there can be beauty in here too. So I'm not saying all of this is bad. It's just a hyper aroused state for the body to be in chronically. And over time, of course, the body's going to have to return to balance. And if you don't make room for that, it will crash. And that's with all of us. So again, like, I just happen to have this entertainment canvas, but we're all learning to regulate and find balance in, whatever our respective life paths are. And so, speaking to some of the goodness, of course, I loved working with other young people. Cheaper was such a great example of that. Sean Levy was the director, and he also, looking back now and working with children myself, I can pinpoint who the safe adults were. Mm-hmm. And I think Sean did a great job at building in break times between the longer hours and making sure that when we were in school, we were actually learning the material and not just what we call on set banking hours that legally you have to fulfill, but, aren't very productive. So loved working with the kids, still have some friendship ties to a few of the kids in the cheaper films. And of course, like the art itself, I loved dancing. I loved the process of learning about characters and how you can't judge a character you're playing or else you will get in the way of giving an honest performance. So you have to have compassion. You have to have empathy. There were lots of beautiful life skills, I think, gained in the process. And, as I said, there was just this kind of chronic workaholism, hyperarousal, hypervigilance, and then things happening behind closed doors with my family. So that's all of us, right? There's always so many layers to what we're experiencing, and rarely do people know about all of them. I think what's challenging when you're in the public eye are all the assumptions made about who you are, and you don't really get a chance to explain yourself to people, nor is it even worth it because the criticism will come back tenfold no matter what you say. So that's been a tough learning curve.
Yeah. It's one of the most important things I think we can all carry with us is how can I meet someone and try not to complete that who they are sentence. And I find myself always saying this and then falling into that trap with this interaction or this, and then always being so pleasantly surprised with vulnerability or, wait, what was I just watching? This is going to be such a surface stupid example. Wait, it was... Oh, Survivor. Do you watch Survivor?
I don't have a TV, but I know the show.
Which I love that. And we'll have to talk about that. But on Survivor, there's a character and like, it's not a character, it's a person. And I'm thinking, oh, this person annoys me or oh, this person, blah, blah, blah. And then they do that 1 5-minute moment where they say, this is where I came from. This is my home. And I'm like, oh my gosh, now I have so much compassion for how annoying they seem, So I love that you do that. And that's what you try to give to others in hopes that they give it to you. Something maybe you've coined is this toddler to train wreck pipeline. And you got into this industry at an incredibly young age. And we've seen people who got into the industry at the same time as you, unfortunately, end up in really unfortunate situations. And some of them are no longer even here. So when you reflect, what are some of the harder things for you to process about the environment that you were in, that you felt like the public who craves fame or the girls who wish that they were you, now you think and struggle to maybe, or that now you think back on and wonder, oh, was I robbed of my childhood in this way or the innocence in that way?
Ooh, I mean, that's so layered, and really the best reference point is to go listen to the podcast because I have broken down each area of life and the different topics. Something that comes to mind is the psychology of auditioning. And at surface level, you think you're just kind of learning some lines, going into a room with a stranger, performing them, maybe getting some notes, trying it again, and then leaving. And maybe you don't get it and that feels like rejection, but maybe you get a call back and blah, blah, blah. It seems pretty simple. But now that I have studied this for, a decade and have some certifications in the space, and I recognize what's going on psychologically and neurobiologically in a young person's mind as they're portraying these scenes, it's wild to think that, let's say, you're a busy young performer and you've got 7 auditions in a week, and 3 in one day. And you are legitimately contorting who you believe yourself to be. You're contorting your emotional state of being. You're perhaps enacting some really intense material. Maybe there's violence. Maybe someone in your family is supposed to be, dead. Maybe you are the killer. Like, who knows? But you're in these intense scenarios. You go into this room and have to go to that place psychologically on the spot. And then the person who's recording you is completely unfamiliar. So as a young person, when you meet an adult for the first time, you're kind of like, who are you? I don't know who I am yet. And where's my parent? They're not in the room with me. So, is this a safe space? You don't really know. And then you leave, and there's no moment to even process what just happened or come out of character. And so I realized as a kid, I was collecting these stories and actually embedding them as false memories. They weren't my own. They belonged to a character, but because I didn't have fully formed logic or the ability to separate between fantasy and reality yet, was storing them as if I had lost my mom, as if I had killed that person, as if I had lived through that natural disaster. And so, yes, I want to acknowledge that many people have actually had that experience, and I'm not equating them. What I'm demonstrating or attempting to demonstrate is it's an unusual psychological experience to put yourself through, even as an adult, let alone as a kid who doesn't have a fully formed sense of self yet. Another thing that comes to mind, which again, the podcast is far more articulate because I pre-scripted them, but there's something around bodily autonomy, and I had no idea that I didn't understand boundaries at all, because I only had one map of reality, and that was at any given time as a kid, strangers and adults can touch me and ask me to do anything physically, and my role was to comply and say yes. And it's scary now to look at the situations that I was in, but I think even more so some of my peers were in. And we didn't know that we were being manipulated. We were just trying to be cool like the adults in the room. But I have all of these stories. Like, I constantly think about, I don't know if I put this in the podcast, might be an exclusive, woo. But I don't know, maybe I did in some episode, but there was a young girl group, singing group, and the executives, before they started rehearsal, the label executives pushed a bag of cocaine across the table to them and said, "You're going to need this in order to keep up with the rehearsal schedule we'll have you on." It was painted as if it was a helpful aid to get them through their training so they could perform. These were like 14 to 16-year-olds, and now their dealers also have power over them contractually, and so they're now addicted. They're going to these adults who can get a lot out of them because they're not only the dealer, they're also the executive, da-da-da-da-da. So there's like all of these intense things going on that people don't know about. They think you're just like having the best time of your life.
And did you hear that through the grapevine, or someone who was in this group?
I know someone, yeah.
Got it. That's insane. I mean, and just also like the idea of keeping your spot and staying relevant. And if I say no, they'll bring the next person in, creates this pressure to just like comply and just say yes and don't be difficult.
Yeah, totally. Fame also, if I can just share these 3 statistics, I put them on, as many conversations as possible, because it really pierces through our, sense of being enamored with fame, I think, instantly. First, fame through research has been proven to have the same addictive properties as being abusing substances. So flat out, it can be an addiction. It is an addiction for people who experience fame. Second, sorry, now I'm going to blank. The other one that comes to mind. Oh, yes. Okay. So the average lifespan of a person experiencing fame, at least in the States, is 14 years younger than a non-famous person. So if you'd like to live 14 years less, I highly encourage you to become famous. And that's for a variety of reasons. And then the third is, if you're experiencing fame, you're 4 times as likely to die by suicide. So These 3 facts
Four
alone.
times?
4 times.
Wow.
That's from some research from a person, I think Jib Foles. I might be mixing my research in my head, but, definitely fact check me. I'm not here to spread misinformation, but I do want to be able to cut through the illusion that we have, because the outside, of course, promises something very different.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of the audition process, you've been open about your story auditioning for Katniss in the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
Would you be open to share that?
Yeah, sure. First and foremost, I was a huge fan of the books, and I loved that there was a socio-political commentary, and there were, deeper messages underneath, the surface level plot. I actually loved Katniss for, her athleticism, and related a lot to certain qualities, or, aspired to relate to her strength and kind of self-sufficiency. And so during the audition process, I think in, a year prior to that, or around then, I think it was like 4 or 5 movies coming out in one year. It was quite a busy time. But when you're a minor and you're trying to transition to adulthood, there's this like other challenge of trying to not get stuck as a kid star, and so you're like really doing whatever you can to secure your position. And many of my peers, Demi, Selena, Miley, had music, had other business verticals, other roles that were helping carry them, and I was going, like time's creeping up. Well, simultaneously, I was also in the throes of my eating disorder, and that really kind of dominated my daily experience. Like, there's no other way around it. I had journals full of just recording what had been eaten and when, and what exercise had been done, and, started out with good intentions of just wanting to be healthy, and then, escalated intensely. And so with the Hunger Games audition, the role obviously describes someone who's lean, who's athletic, and in some ways, is in survival mode. So you don't have a ton of extra meat on your bones. And I, through my eating disorder brain, was like, okay, I think I have enough control here that I can intensify my training a little bit for the audition, but not let the eating disorder take over. Well, definitely was not mentally equipped to do that. And so I went through a rigorous training process. I even dyed my hair. I thought about wearing, color contacts, whatever I could do to, create a better chance at getting the role. And definitely, didn't even make it past probably the first or second round. And I was crushed, sure, but listen, we've all been rejected thousands of times. So it wasn't just that. It was the symbolism of having truly given my all to this industry for my entire life, having given it kind of my last shot of can I do this, and to what level am I willing to risk and sacrifice my health and my sanity to get a job? And in that moment, I realized, okay, the eating disorder really needs to be addressed. That has to be a focal point. And I have to re-examine my relationship to my job. At 6, I was working, or 7, I was working full time, essentially. So it was in my wiring, right? Like anyone who was a student athlete, or, it's like you got up at 5 to go to the ice skating rink. You got up at 6 to go swimming before class, whatever. So, I had to do a lot of deep rewiring. But thankfully, I'm still a fan of the movies. I still went to see them and was still excited about them. It meant so many other things internally.
Mm-hmm. And was it that experience that was the tipping point that gave you the realization that you needed that external help in going to a rehab center?
I knew that I needed external help already. So for I think maybe 3 or 4 years before that, I had worked with a dietitian. I tried to go to therapy, tried a couple different outpatient solutions, and I was still under contracts, so I couldn't take off 3 months to go get help. I was working back to back. And then at the same time, the eating disorder, unfortunately, like, it's reinforced in the industry because I was working, I think I did some modeling for Nike, and I did a healthy living campaign with former First Lady Michelle Obama. And I was painted, I did this series called the Get Fit with Alyson for and I was painted as a role model of sorts for health and well-being. And I wish the perfectionistic part of me didn't grab a hold of that and make it my main personality trait, because I became so obsessive. I was like, I have to lead the generation.
Yeah.
I've got to be the most fit. I've got to be the best at this. Silly. That's not it. But I had been wrestling for years. I think the disordered eating, I would say, before it became eating disorder, was probably around 11, 12. And by age 13, it was definitely qualified as several different eating disorders. Yeah. And I wanted help,
Mm-hmm.
So I should say it was both and. I didn't want help because I needed it as a survival tactic, but I also was like, felt so helpless and stuck in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's 80% of women are disordered eaters, but then just the statistics of like how many people do experience eating disorders. And
Yeah.
I know that you've mentioned elsewhere that you struggled with binge eating, and I struggled with that all through college. And it's just like this weird thing in society where you're encouraged to lose all this weight and look a certain way and weigh less.
Yeah.
But then, and also the way that it was like you took this identity of being healthy, and then it's
Right.
like a lot of unhealthy eating tendencies people would look at and say, this is amazing, and they'd praise you and say, you're eating all these vegetables and you're eating low cal and you're not trying to cut out cheese, whatever the stupid
Right.
thing is. But it's actually glorifying something that's making you really unwell.
Right.
I am less healthy when I'm not allowed to eat cake.
Right, exactly.
Mentally.
Yes, and of course it's so individual. So, as someone whose tendency was toward restriction, I knew that a part of my healing journey was learning to be okay adding in more options. Whereas for someone who maybe feels afraid of, ever being told no, then there's some healing opportunities to recognize, maybe I don't need to have one of every single thing. Maybe there is some freedom to be felt in choosing an option today and then a different option tomorrow. Like, it's the healing and recovery is so individualistic, and it's non-linear. Like, I circle back around to urges or behaviors every now and again. It's usually during a particularly stressful time in life, and my body remembers. It goes, oh, hey, I remember at 13 you used this tactic. How about that again? And now I go, okay, I know, I appreciate you trying to use something that you thought worked once, but that's not really going to get us where we're trying to go ultimately. But yeah, I think, what was a key part of my recovery was rebuilding the mind-body connection, because I had completely severed trust from listening to my own bodily cues. I mean, I was terrified of them as well.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of trust building there to be able to use the term intuitive eating and to actually feel like it took me, I will admit, it took me years of trying to practice quote-unquote intuitive eating before I finally woke up one day and was like, oh my gosh, I genuinely only feel like eating when I'm hungry, and now that I'm full, I'm actually okay walking away. Imagine.
Oh my gosh, I'm an avid intuitive eater and I love it, but it does take lots of time, and then it is that day where you kind of forget about it and you're like, wait, I've been listening to myself without even thinking about it.
Yeah, and it's a longer arc of habits, right? Before it used to be like I would calculate what I'm doing by every single meal or by every day or by every week, when in reality, like, the ebb and flow of life, it's okay, what have the trends been for the last month? What have the trends been for the last half year? Like, now I can say, oh, okay, like, of course there's going to be a week where if I'm extra busy and traveling, I'm going to be, some of my meals might come from airport food and not home cooked. Like, that's just life. But if I'm trying to scrutinize every single choice individually, like, I'm gonna feel like I'm on a roller coaster. So some more for me, that's me. But everyone listening, listen to your own damn body.
Facts. You mentioned Demi, Miley, Selena, some of those similar names and faces that were all coming up through Disney, Nickelodeon at the same time. Mm-hmm. You know, Selena did her documentary on her mental health, mm-hmm. and Demi did something recently as well. And Miley, one of her recent songs I loved, and she was wearing like a Mickey Mouse. And if you listen to the lyrics, it's really talking about like her journey. So when you see all that, are you like, yep, that's most likely to happen? Are you like, this is so sad? I mean, are there people who you think are anomalies? Do you think the majority of people who experienced fame at a young age are going to struggle with their mental health?
Oof. I think any human who is thrust into such a unique scenario is going to cope in ways and have parts of themselves intensified and experience challenges. I do think that's, you can't be in these extraordinary and extreme circumstances without being affected. We biologically are wired to be sensitive to what's happening around us and to, figure out how to respond. So I think for, the folks you named, I actually just went and met up with someone you didn't name, but who's in the same group. And what was interesting is to see, even within our individuality, in terms of personality, we have some of the most uncanny, specific, I call them isms, like idiosyncrasies that clearly stem back directly to being a high-performing child in the entertainment industry. And that's what I observe among all of us. I did just see Demi not long ago, a couple weeks ago, and we talked about the experience of dissociation. And dissociation is common for many reasons for many people, happens in varying degrees, and specifically for kid performers, a lot of us share this experience of reaching a point in time where our bodies just went offline. Or, sorry, that's a poetic way of saying it, but we disconnected from ourselves to survive what we were going through, and now we've got these pretty intense gaps in memory. And so we get asked about, like, what was it like working on projects? And I'm like, I've got lists of stories of how I answer, but I actually don't. Someone reminded me of some projects I was in. I didn't even remember filming. It's like, was I even there? So there are, I think, specific things that we all will share that, just like kids who were in another niche thing, like I'm not going to know what it's like to be a master chess player. And we just happen to be playing out our careers and our healing journeys in the public eye. So I'm not surprised at all to see each of them in their respective healing journeys, documenting and sharing. And I always want every one of us, inside and out of the industry, to find that ticket, that pathway towards self-empowerment, resilience, because from there you can start to define what story you want to tell from here on out.
And what about on the flip side of that? If I think about like, Kevin Jonas, who seems to be happily married and like living a very charming life. And then like, do you think when it comes to the child stars who, once again, to your very early point, we never know.
You don't.
We never know.
The answer's in the question.
You're right. I guess I feel like, though, when I think about student athletes, if someone told me they played a D1 sport for 4 years, like I feel very confident that it's super unlikely, given the high intensity environment, that they would say, I never had a problem with my mental health.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yes. I agree. And I think each of us, it's funny because I was perceived, I think for the most part, as the quote unquote stable one, quote unquote like good kid.
I would validate that.
Because I don't drink, I don't smoke, I was in the church and, didn't even date till I was 18. Like I was cookie cutter, whatever, goody two shoes kind of kid. And also was like, let me write a book report for fun and school is awesome. And so from the outside, I think folks characterized me as sort of the, I don't know, the one who actually could have been wearing the purity rings. Ironic.
Yeah.
But in reality, that doesn't mean that someone's actually doing okay internally like whatsoever, right?
Right.
So my drugs of choice were achievement, were social approval, were, you know, goodness and having that good reputation. Like there was still an addiction to that. There was still deceit in that. I wasn't letting anyone see, even myself see, the intense anxiety, the intense, you know, eating disorder behaviors. Like, so of course we can look at someone and say, no, they look well adjusted. And now I don't want to assume that folks are suffering more than they are. I do think we, you know, we come into this world, we have different temperaments, different capacities through, you know, XYZ variables. Some of us can withstand more and not be as affected. I would say in some regards, my home space prepared me to be able to withstand a lot in the industry and not be as thrown by it in the way that some of my peers might have been. But vice versa. Like they have areas where Demi, Selena, Miley, the amount of criticism and hostility that they receive every single day, I could not fathom how that would actually go down in my nervous system.
So with how vocal you are about this issue, which is so important, what's the reaction been from the industry? I know you still work and you have great jobs that you sustain, so it's not like you've completely exiled it.
Right.
And I'm curious also how your family feels.
Ooh, these are big questions. The industry, so it's been really neat to receive feedback from people who are in different parts of the ecosystem. So, for example, voiceover directors who I've been working with since I was a little baby, to wardrobe designers, to on-set teachers, all chiming in. And not only, you know, saying they're glad the podcasts exist, but adding their input, because that's really the most important factor here is like, don't just listen to me, read the comments. And people are sharing about their experiences in the industry. Also, folks who aren't in Hollywood but have, you know, parallel cause and effect in their own well-being. Like that's just as important to the conversation as what, you know, of course I'm trying to lay out for everyone. So the industry, I think the way I'm approaching it, hopefully, is like, I'm not here to condemn one evil person or the whole monster. It's really like, let's work together to improve this. It doesn't have to be that expensive, doesn't have to be that burdensome. And if y'all don't want to hurt people, I don't want to hurt people, let's like address that. So I think people don't feel attacked, so that's good.
Yeah, and that's the vibe that I get as a listener
I'm glad.
and a supporter of what you're doing, is it's like, hey, this is this great thing, but there's a lot that needs to be fixed and adjusted for the betterment of the people doing this and to save more lives.
Yes. Thank you for getting that, because the save more lives part is, of course, like, that is central to it. And we are working with the legislators now. I am working with some state reps on adjusting some language within a bill they're proposing to be more supportive of kid performers. And that's like wild. You know, this impact and action are core to what I value. So I'm like, the podcast, yes, let it serve the purpose of visibility, but also now what do we do with it? How does this translate to impact? Family watching the podcast, that is, it's really complex. So, you know, some of these topics we've talked about as a family, some we haven't in this way. Some I bring to them before it releases and I ask how they feel about it coming forward. Some of it I, as an adult, am having to make the difficult decision to honor my truth and my lived experience, knowing that it isn't as
ideal for someone else.
Yes. And that's the hardest part, because I know what it's like to be the person in front of a microphone, and it feels so much more vulnerable than you can predict when you're just watching someone else do it on your phone at home. You know, you're like, oh, I could talk about anything. When suddenly your personal business is out there for the world, it's harder than it appears. And so I know, having lived through that if I'm now going to put information about someone else out there who's close to me, this could affect their reputation. It could affect a number of things, not just our own relationship. And so it's complicated, but I'm also, as I heal, recognizing all of the ways that I have protected other people at the expense of honoring what my experience was and speaking candidly about some things that really do need to be said. Yeah. Especially if we're trying to help other people. So that's tough. It's not something that I think I'm towing the line, and I don't think I'm nailing it.
Yeah. No. I feel like, thanks so much. I feel like, or I guess you said don't feel like I'm nailing it. I'd say, I feel like you just having that understanding is nailing it, because, and it's a realization I've had to have with myself this year, is like, well, who's my support if I have to feel like I'm keeping secrets or I'm protecting someone else when like I need help or I want to talk to someone? Who do I get a call, and can I trust someone? And so I feel like I've had similar things of, okay, I'm 26, I'm a grown woman, and if I want to be an adult and talk to another adult who's my friend about something happening in my life because of the not great actions of another adult, that's their cross to bear. Like, why am I not able to call my friend? So, I feel like I relate to what you're saying. So I guess, where would you say you stand when it comes to the industry and how you feel about it, and where are you hoping it goes in the future?
I think the industry was designed with adults in mind. So if children are going to be a part of it, we have to do some additional training and preparation and considerations culturally to create safer environments. That's easy. It's, simple. Bring a mental health coordinator on set. Come on, we can do that. Second, the industry is not the only industry that needs problems addressed. So I highly encourage, folks to look at their sphere of influence, look at their own community, look at their own industry, and first examine yourselves, of course, then examine, what's happening around you, and ask yourself, what can I do? And I'm not expecting all of us to be able to fundamentally rewire everything overnight single-handedly. That's not going to happen. But we can do something about how we show up. And with the industry, I'm hoping that, with the strikes and with different things happening, that we're considering human well-being. We're considering how to make sustainable productions. We're considering what's going on behind the scenes and not just what we're portraying at face value for audiences. It's funny to me, a lot of folks who are hearing about the strike, they don't know that 98% of actors are unemployed and usually have second and third jobs, and only 2%, I believe, can actually pay for their living expenses through acting alone. People think that it's like rich people saying, no, pay us more. And I'm like, no, wait. That's, nope. That's not what's actually happening in the industry. So hoping for more transparency and understanding across the board. And then looking forward, in my little sphere, I'm excited to share my well-being toolkits with acting schools, with agencies. It can be a preventative resource. It's like the yellow, light before you just go right through and don't know that you're about to drive off a cliff. Like, it's your cautionary, prep moment, and families and kids can feel, more confident in the choices they're making, what's driving them, and how to manage the inevitable challenges that arise.
Well, thank you so much. I think the work that you're doing is beautiful. And although we don't always want to struggle in life, we can make beautiful things from it and help others. And I think you're doing that. So thank you for coming on Real Pod. I love Dear Hollywood. I hope everyone listens to it because it's so eye-opening. And I just hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will be following along.
Thank you. Likewise. And thanks for such a great conversation.
Thanks.